Hello and welcome to the programme. From a peak of 100,000 to perhaps no US troops in Afghanistan by Christmas, if Donald Trump has his way. But with Taliban attacks continuing, would the country be at risk of another civil war? This is Roundtable. Well, the Pentagon said to be concerned that President Trump has overstepped the mark, that some troops must remain. The question is, for how long? President Trump's words about an end of the year total withdrawal came as a shock to many. He tweeted, "We should have the small remaining number of our brave men and women serving in Afghanistan home by Christmas." It would leave forces in a race against time to dismantle US military headquarters there, and it's prompted concerns about the impact on complex peace negotiations between the Afghan government and the Taliban. Under this year's deal, the group struck with the United States, troops were set to withdraw by 2021, next May, if conditions on counter-terrorism were met by then. But if the soldiers are to be out within months, is Afghanistan ready for a US pullout? Well, I'm very pleased to say we can welcome to this round table Javid Faisal, a former spokesman for the National Security Council of Afghanistan. What is the biggest danger of an early American withdrawal of all troops?
Well, I think what we were preparing for was next year, not this year. But at any time, Afghanistan is preparing. It's not just the last 1 year, it's the last 4 years that we are preparing. And I think we shall no longer need foreign troops on the ground. But of course, we will need some technical support to continue the burden, to share the burden that's on our shoulders.
Are there added dangers if, as President Trump seems to want, the troops are pulled out earlier than the current timetable?
Well, we haven't heard such a thing from the officials. The messages that are coming are mixed messages, but we will see how things evolve in the coming weeks. Like I said earlier, we have been preparing for this moment, and all we would need in the future is just some technical support, not the presence of troops on the battlefields.
Dr. Abdullah, who's leading the negotiating team with the Taliban and other Afghan groups, has said that this President Trump's tweet, gives the Taliban the upper hand.
Well, this could be the case as there are misperceptions of the situations that the Taliban do not really count on the peace talks, or that they are not really willing to make peace, as has been shown in their actions. So they might be receiving this differently in the way we received that tweet, in the way the American people have received it. So that could be the potential danger.
Afghanistan is still very much not at peace. We've seen increasing Taliban attacks. They're taking more territory, gaining more influence. The US has retaliated. Is the country in any way in a better position than it was at the height of the US troop positioning there, which was around about 10 years ago?
Well, I think the Taliban were there all these years. There wasn't a time in the past, let's say 15 or 16 years, where we didn't have threats from the Taliban or Al-Qaeda or other terrorist groups. And those threats still remain to be the same. Maybe in some areas a bit stronger, but they are still the same. What we have achieved so far is that our army, our security institutions have gotten used to, they have the experience of fighting the terror, the Taliban and other groups, which is a big plus point for us. But in the same time, the war that continues, the hostility, that's not a good sign for the country and for the peace process. that we seek to produce good results.
I was interested in something that Thomas Parker, who used to work in the presidential office in the Department of State in Defense, he's now a professor at George Washington University in charge of security studies, interested in what he had to say. And it was this: a total international withdrawal of military personnel would result in an Afghan civil war whose violence would be even worse than the current level. About 60,000 full-time Taliban fighters, various militia groups, and remnants of the Afghan National Army would jockey for power locally and for control of Kabul. He seems to be suggesting that there could be chaos.
Well, what is not true is that the Taliban are not in a position, and they will not be in a position even without any American support to the Afghan government and the people to capture Afghanistan, because that has been shown in the past. They weren't able to do it in the past, and they wouldn't be able to do it in the future. But what is clear is that if things move in the current pace and the way they are going today, we might not be seeing a peace that is countrywide, a peace that is lasting, and a peace that doesn't strengthen the fear of more war within Afghanistan after there is a full withdrawal from Afghanistan. What is clear is that the Afghans would defend their country with the support or without the support of the US, because this is our country, and that the Taliban will ultimately have to become part of the Afghan society. So for the Taliban, the smart choice will be to join the peace process, to make peace with Afghan people and stop killing its own people and destroying its own infrastructure.
Is a civil war looming, do you think?
I don't think. It belongs to Afghans to make smart choices. The Taliban, of course, should make smart choices, because fighting against their own people is not in Islam. It's not in our cultures. It's not in the interests of Afghans. So they'll have to make smart choices so we don't strengthen this fear that could be with some people.
A final thought, if I may. The Taliban have said that if US forces leave, if the peace talks fail, they will be, and this is the words of one of their spokesmen, compelled to continue the war to topple the Afghanistan government. It doesn't sound like a sound basis for a peaceful country going forward.
This is what I was mentioning just a minute before, is that the Taliban have to be smart. They should not kill their own people. They should not destroy their own infrastructures. If they can make peace with the world or with the foreigners, they should be able to make peace with their own people. If that's something they cannot do, if that's something they could fail in, then there shouldn't be hopes for them. What we have seen so far from them is not very hopeful, but we hope the future will be different and they will be able to make smart choices and stop killing their own people, because they cannot conquer this country. The history has shown, and the institutions that we have today are so much more stronger than the Taliban can think of, and they have tried to test the resilience of our institutions and our people, and they have failed. So failures in the future will come their way, and that's why they have to make smart choices and make peace, not more war in this country that we don't need.
Javid Faisal, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Roundtable. Well, time for us now to go to Florida in the USA. Say hello to Murid Partaw, former senior national representative of Afghanistan to US Central Command. We go to Washington, D.C., where we can see Laurel Miller, Director of International Crisis Group's Asia program. And also in the US's capital, we see Ahmad Shah Mohibi, founder of the non-profit organization Rise to Peace. Good to have all three of you with you. Let me talk to you, Ahmad Shah, first of all. I've just spoken to the former spokesman for the National Security Agency in Afghanistan. He says he thinks even if the US troops do pull out pretty quickly, there will be no civil war. But the possibilities of chaos in Afghanistan seem to be at the top of so many people's minds.
As we're speaking right now, Taliban are day 10 of offensive in Helmand. Just yesterday, there was a big explosion happening in Gore province, killing over 100 people. I think I agree with Mr. Faisal in a way that he has optimism for peace, as after 19 years of war, a U.S.-Taliban deal gave hope for contemporary Afghans that peace is possible. But I have to warn that Afghan leaders are uncertain about the future of Afghanistan. If we look back historically and the trajectory of Afghan political system, the power vacuum left by the Soviet Union in 1990s created a civil war that later on made the United States to intervene. So I think a U.S. exit strategy is not a strategy given that the mission is not over yet. We went there for a reason. We have to stay. And there is really less vibes from the Taliban trustworthiness. Even they signed a deal with the United States back in earlier this year, but we still see surgent violence, the Taliban violating the agreement, and they got 5,000 of their troops, their prisoners. On top of everything, the violence is not stopping. Casualties are really high. So, and then the fractured political system of Afghanistan. If we look at it, 2014, starting 2019, 2009, 2014, even 2019, the 3 contested elections, it went almost the country to a civil war. It was 2 U.S. Secretary of State that brokered a deal. So I think optimism should be put aside, and let's talk about the reality on the ground. The reality on the ground is that Afghanistan is not ready for a U.S. pullout before the threat is gone.
No surprise, Laurel, that the president has said this. Every US president since the Revolutionary War has wanted to bring troops home in time for Christmas. It's symbolic in its own way. But what would be premature about this, in your opinion?
Well, it's not premature in the sense of if you look at the length of time that the U.S. military has been deployed in Afghanistan, and it's not, in a sense, politically premature in that there is waning U.S. political interest in its military deployments in Afghanistan. The question isn't should the U.S. eventually bring its troops home. The question is, how should it go about doing that, and under what conditions should it go about doing that? And I do believe that if the U.S. abruptly withdrew its forces from Afghanistan without any political settlement among Afghans being in place, then you would see an intensified and more chaotic civil war, probably a disintegration of the existing government structure. I don't think the Taliban would rapidly take over the country and the cities. It wouldn't roll into Kabul the day after the Americans rolled out, so to speak. But there would be an intensified struggle, and it's not one that I think would be to the advantage of the existing government.
Murid, in terms of military capability, Abdullah, in charge of the negotiations for Afghanistan, has said that of the several thousand Taliban prisoners that have been released, many of them have returned to the battlefield, even though they had said that they wouldn't. They're back fighting, both Afghan troops and US troops.
That's right. Thank you, David, first of all, and pleasure to be in this important and timely panel on Afghanistan. Actually, you were right. Yes, most of those Taliban who were released have returned indeed to the battlefield, and this is a situation that the Afghan government has been complaining for a while now. But look, the reality is that the United States and the Afghan governments both have made a lot of concessions to get to the Taliban on the table. And now the process has begun, the intra-Afghan process has begun. So it all depends on this important process that the two sides, the Afghan government in this case, the national government and the Taliban movement to come together and put their differences aside and form a future national government. And that would be challenging without any doubt.
And without tweets like the ones from President Trump, because Abdullah again has said that what President Trump put out there about the troops being home for Christmas has given the Taliban the upper hand.
Absolutely, I concur with that. With that assessment, I think it's a mistake to tell the Taliban that we are leaving sooner than later. That has certainly emboldened the group to take a harsh line in their negotiations, and as well as intensify their battle against the Afghan security forces, because the U.S. Taliban agreement, which was signed in February 2020, did not explicitly forbid the Taliban from going after the Afghan National Security Forces. So the Afghans are dying, unfortunately, in high numbers. And this situation is something that should stop, and it should have stopped by the beginning of the intra-Afghan Afghan dialogue. But since the Afghan government is fragile, weak, dysfunctional, and divided, so that has also created some complication to start the process.
I wonder if we could take it perhaps to another stage. And Laurel, I'll bring you in at this point, and then we'll go to Ahmed again. If and when the US troops are no longer in Afghanistan, what other countries are eyeing up opportunities, perhaps nefariously, when there's no longer an American presence in the country?
Well, whether other countries in the region have an opportunity to meddle in Afghan affairs is going to depend a lot on the conditions under which the U.S. departs the scene. Will it be in the context of a political settlement among Afghans, or will it be in the context of increasing chaos in the country? The latter scenario gives more opportunity and more likelihood to the probability that neighboring states interfere in negative ways in Afghanistan, backing different factions in a civil war in the country in ways that just perpetuate that civil war. So, it's no secret that Pakistan, Iran, Russia, to some extent China, and others, but those are the key players, have over a long period of time had connections with, relations with, and backing of different factions. India as well has played that game. Pakistan's the most prominent of them. In a political and security chaos scenario, there's going to be plenty of opportunity for all of those interested parties, as they see themselves, to perpetuate conflict and to be negative players. There's an opportunity for them to be more positive players as well, in the context of Afghans themselves forging a political settlement and all of these external players supporting that political settlement.
Okay, Ahmed Shah, which of the countries, and those were the ones that I was going to mention that Laurel has just listed there, do you think has the most to gain from supporting the Taliban, perhaps against the Afghan government? And what can be done without US troops there to prevent that?
I think Afghanistan has a complex historical war, so it's really hard to put which country, but the region has an influence in Afghanistan. I put it this: the strategic location of Afghanistan, it speaks for itself a lot. It's a country really rich when it comes to natural resources, minerals, narcotics, for example. It's a really, really big business for the Taliban. The illicit resources, they control different routes. The pipeline from Uzbekistan coming all the way to India, even Pakistan, that is an interest when it comes to economics. China initiatives with the copper in Lugar province a couple of years ago. But when we look at it, for example, historic facts and what has been, the Taliban birthplace has been Pakistan, and Pakistan and their Prime Minister Imran Khan has keen towards supporting an Afghan peace process that could be able to build a more warm government in Kabul that is more warm towards Islamabad rather than Delhi. So that is one of the prominent countries in that region that may benefit the most and would like to have the Afghan conflict go one way that could benefit Pakistan the most. Iran wants the United States to suffer badly in Afghanistan, given the prolonged history of hate and love or condition that they have since the fall of Ahmad Reza Shah Pahlavi. So Afghanistan could be another proxy war. It could be another battleground for terrorism, as we have over 22 terrorist organizations operating right now, while the Taliban are in Doha making peace. Daesh and the ISIS of Khorasan is taking over and building a potential strong caliphate in South and Central Asia. So it has to be more of what is it that gave to the region and to the Russians, to the Chinese, and to the two neighbors, and also even India. So there's a lot.
So let's try and establish. Let's try and see if we can work out whether Afghanistan. Murid, let me ask you this one: whether Afghanistan is any more secure now than it was at the height of the U.S. troop deployment there, which was around about 2010, when there were 100,000 U.S. forces in the country. Is it any more stable now?
Unfortunately not. Unfortunately, the violence is surging in Afghanistan, and the government and the security situation is tenuous and fragile than any other time in the past. And this is due to both the political problems, challenges, and as well as the security deterioration as a result of Taliban intensification of their violence. So definitely the Taliban are in have the upper hand right now across Afghanistan. They have been boldened. That's why they are not making concessions in these intra-Afghan peace talks. So the security situation, on the other hand, they have intensified, as my colleague was saying.
But why? This is my follow-up point to this. Why is it that 10 years after the height of the US troops in Afghanistan, the people in that country are no more secure than they were, given that billions of dollars have been poured into the country? There have been supposedly the stabilizing presence of foreign troops there to keep out the extremists. Why hasn't it worked, Laurel?
It's a combination of factors, and one you pointed to in the reverse in what you just said in your question. It has proven to be the case that the presence of foreign soldiers in Afghanistan has not been stabilizing. In fact, it has been ultimately destabilizing because it has motivated the insurgency, and it has perpetuated the rationale for the war on the part of the insurgents. Another key
But there was an
factor,
insurgency before the foreign troops arrived. That was why the troops went in there, because of the Taliban's backing of Al-Qaeda.
The Taliban regime, yes, there was still some fighting going on, but the Taliban had largely, they had control of the capital. They had control of much of the country. The U.S. overthrew the Taliban as an organization and as a government entity. It was largely wiped away, but obviously Taliban constituencies and individuals were not wiped away. They were able to regroup from Pakistan, and they reemerged as an insurgency in the 2005-06 period with growing strength at that point. They built their strength and their recruiting prowess, in fact, in part on the argument that there needed to be an expulsion of foreign troops from Afghanistan. Now, I mean, Kabul's weakness is the other side of this equation, the lack of political unity and the lack of indigenous ability on the part of Afghan forces to, on their own, counter the insurgency without foreign help has been another part of the picture here. But, ultimately, I think there was over-reliance both on the part of the United States and on the part of Kabul on the idea, now proven false, that the U.S. could or would be able to quell the insurgency.
So can I ask Ahmad Shah, we're coming towards the end of the program, so briefly, if you don't mind, what it's going to take now to avoid utter calamity?
Well, currently there's a political chaos in Afghanistan, and there's a stalemate in Doha, Qatar. I mean, literally the Taliban have been rejecting the Afghan government at one side of the conflict. I think it's wise and it's fair for the United States government to have a lot of pressure, military pressure on the Taliban operations, like coming through Helmand and other places in Afghanistan, where they could be able to tell the Taliban that negotiations are your only option going forward. I think it's
But
very
that's only
vital.
going to work if US troops are there, and they're going to be out probably by May next year, whoever wins the election.
Well, I'm talking about more of a long-term sustainable plan. You're dealing with an insurgency group at the end of the day. The Taliban have been in a dirty war of manipulation that after they deal with the US government in earlier this year, they have been going proudly and undermining the rule of the Afghan government in the peace talks. It's going to undermine the diplomatic effort in Doha if the US disengages. If the Taliban goes to kill innocent civilians and children in Helmand, a U.S. strike can save more children, and at the same time shows the Taliban that your option of bringing Islamic Emirate, which you're planning to do under a different name by gaining more political share, is impossible. The only path forward is negotiations. I think at the end of the day,
Okay, so
it's the
keep on
intention of the
talking, keep
Taliban.
on talking, which many people have been trying to do for the last 25, 30 years, in fact, going back to 1979 and beyond. Listen, thank you very much indeed. Great to have your thoughts, and thank you wherever you happen to be watching this edition of Roundtable. I'm David Foster. I hope to have your company next time. Until then, goodbye.